name? Spell it for me.
Joseph Strickland, Josephstrickland.
Okay. So, first of all, can we just do like just a short, or I guess it's not really that short, but just a summary overview of what was in your letter that was posted to the website today?
Basically, the letter that we posted to the website dealing with as all the Texas dioceses are publishing names.
Mm-hmm.
We had one name of a priest that had been credibly accused of abusing a minor, and that was addressed when it was brought forward. The civil authorities were brought into it. That priest was dismissed from ministry pending the investigation. The civil authorities did get involved, and he went actually to a civil trial, was convicted, and is presently in prison. So, and that was the one case that the letter speaks of that actually occurred in the Diocese of Tyler.
Okay, and so let's, when this all first came out in Pennsylvania, you and I sat down, we spoke about how you had started, you had already had an organization or a company looking into this for
Correct.
you. Can we
Correct.
go into detail about that?
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned, I believe it was in April of 2018 that we engaged a firm that professionally does this, helps dioceses with making investigations. We did that because just in beginning to look at files, we had made a transition with the promoter of justice, which is the office in the diocese that deals with these kinds of allegations. We'd made a transition in the personnel there. A new promoter of justice was named. And so in light of that, we said, let's review all the files. And so we began that May of last April or May, and then the McCarrick issues and other issues began to come out in June. So we were already engaged in reviewing the files and just seeing what kind of issues might be there so that we could bring any issue that was to justice. We were not responding to any allegation people bringing to us, but just sort of proactively looking at the files at that time.
Okay, and sorry, looking at my notes. Looking at previous news and media coverage of Cuello when he was going through the trial and stuff, some of the information we found said that some of the parishioners actually helped to bail him out, providing bail money. I guess they weren't thinking that maybe he was credibly accused or something. Is there any, can you talk about that at all? Mention, I guess, what was going on back then?
Well, it's fairly vague for me. Of course, I wasn't bishop at that time. I know that it had been on the church side, it was being dealt with. I've heard those same rumors or allegations that someone had bailed him out, but I never really knew too much directly about that. Certainly we would not have supported that, but people are free to do, you know, what they would choose just as private citizens. And that was totally separate from what the church had already done. He'd already been removed from ministry. The canonical steps had been taken. It was the civil courts that had to deal with that issue.
Mm-hmm. Can we kind of talk about the change in mentality that's come about in the last couple of years from before to now? I mean, things like this are becoming, it used to be hush-hush, not talking about it. And I don't mean just in the church, I mean in general. Like,
sure.
But now with the Me Too movement, with stuff with Nasser, the gymnast coach and stuff, it seems that people aren't as afraid to talk about these things. Can we go into that a little?
Certainly, and really for the Catholic Church, that began with the charter, which was the Dallas Charter, it's called, back in 2002, when the church began implementing a lot of structure that would be in place to deal with these kinds of issues. And since then, I think we've seen a growing understanding. Certainly prior to that, say 25 years ago, there was more just in society a tone of keep it quiet, don't make waves, don't talk about it. And that happened in the church and in other organizations as well, just like the gymnast coach. Certainly since 2002, there's been more and more, and certainly I would say, and that's part of the reason the Texas bishops are publishing names today, is because this needs to be brought into the light. Victims don't need to just continue to be victimized and feel like they can't speak up. a harm has been done. If it's a credible allegation, it will be investigated. And so I think there has been a very positive movement there to deal with the harm being done to people. Certainly there can always be false allegations, but a tone where it's a victim's voice is heard and respected more, and they're encouraged to not just bury this and try to pretend it didn't happen, but bring it forward and try to deal with it in justice. I think that's a more positive place to be for the church and for society in general.
And I think you kind of answered this a little bit, but can we go a little bit more in depth of where does the church go from here? How do you reassure the people? Because like you said, every bishop in Texas is releasing these names today. So in Texas, they're going to be seeing these lists of names if you add them all together. So how do you reassure them?
Well, I think we just do that and let people know. I mean, we have basically a hotline established where people don't have to call me or call anyone here. They can call the firm that we're working with directly. It's published in all of our bulletins. It's on our diocesan website. We want people to if they're victimized in any way, and hopefully it's not always rising to the level of sexual abuse of a minor, but anyway, that people feel a need to speak up for justice in their cause, that we have a 1-800 number that they can call, and it's immediately referred to us, and it begins to be reviewed even before we're aware of it, because that's one thing we did back in early 2018 to engage a third party, just to broaden that trust and let people know we really are seriously dealing with this, and it's not just something that we'll internally decide, well, there's nothing credible here. We have a third party that begins to look at it even before we do to determine, is there something here? And sometimes, certainly, in all kinds of situations, it can be found to really not be credible. Maybe the individual being accused can be proven, wasn't even in the country at that time, or wasn't present in that city when it supposedly occurred. Mm-hmm. So you can do some of that initial investigation to find out whether time, place, names, circumstances begin to match up so that it looks credible.
Okay, and so there was one priest that we found. He's currently serving time in Ohio, Robert, and I don't know how to say his last name, Poandl. And I know he had spent some time here. I know the accusation wasn't while he was here, but can we talk about that a little bit?
Correct. He had served here for a time as a religious order priest. We, at the time that we were notified, and that's how it kind of works in the church since the Dallas Charter in 2002, we're obligated to notify, like his religious community notified us because he had served here in the territory of diocese at one time. We notified the parishes at that time. I wasn't bishop then, but I remember assisting the bishop who was in place, and we notified the parishioners of that community to say, does anyone have an allegation that they need to bring forward? We didn't hear anything. So that's how that would work with a religious community. It's a little different than a diocesan priest.
And then with Monsignor Flynn and Reverend Baroni, obviously they aren't in Tyler at this time. What happens next with the church? So they found the two different dioceses, they found credible. Yeah. So what happens to those two now? Do they turn it over to authorities? Do they get removed from the priesthood? What happens?
Well, they're already both retired and not in active ministry. In one of those cases, in the Flynn case, we've already communicated with the Archdiocese of San Antonio, and we've made sure, or done our best to make sure we're dealing with the same information. He is retired and not in priestly ministry at all, does not work as a priest publicly. Mm-hmm. In the other case, we were just yesterday notified that there was a credible allegation in Dallas. Both of these took place in other dioceses. So we're taking the steps as we typically do if that kind of allegation is brought to us of abuse of a minor by a priest, then we launch a preliminary investigation. That priest is already out of ministry, but we'll even restrict that further as we begin to look into information that we didn't have to address what is the situation. But in both of those cases, the allegations did not occur in the territory of Tyler. So it's really not so much our case, but in justice, we want to be aware of that and support seeking justice even for another diocese.
So another diocese might, with their initial investigation, turn that over to authorities type of thing. Is that?
It's possible.
Okay. Anything else you want to mention, say, that I didn't ask?
I guess I would just emphasize, in my mind, the whole purpose for publishing these lists, which is not, a pleasant thing to have to do for the priest, for the victims, for anyone. In our judgment for the Dioceses of Texas, as we talked about as bishops, the victims, too often their voice is drowned out or forgotten in all of this. We need to care for people who have been harmed, especially by a priest that should be calling them to a holier life in Christ. So that's what I would hope, is that this publishing of names, which is painful and challenging, but I would hope it kind of goes back to what we talked about, that victims can say, I can speak up, someone will listen, I'll be respected as someone who's been harmed in society or in the church, and it will be dealt with seeking justice. So that's the hope, and not to re-victimize anyone. It certainly probably raises some difficult memories for people, but at least to know I've been heard, it's been addressed, and the church is genuinely seeking to deal with it in justice and in the light of Christ.
Okay, I think I'm good.
Okay.
I